Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event called Taming Dragons, a glimpse behind the scenes in the publishing industry. This is I think, the very first event as part of UCL's Arts and Humanities faculty's Back to the Future series of events. And so thank you very much, all of you that are still joining us. I can see the numbers going up at the bottom of the screen. So we are thrilled this afternoon to have a brilliant panel of speakers that will indeed give you a glimpse behind the scenes in three very key areas of the publishing industry. We have Dr. Liz Flanagan, who, as you probably all know, is the author of award-winning YA and children's books. Her work has been widely translated. She's also got a PhD in creative writing, and her PhD novel Eden Summer was published in 2016 by David Fickling Books. She went on to be nominated for the Carnegie Medal, and her second novel, Dragon Daughter, was published in 2018 and won the 2019 Leeds Book Award and the Calderdale Book of the Year. And its sequel, Rise of the Shadow Dragons, was published in May 2020. So Liz speaks about creativity. She works with young people in schools, and she's taught and mentored writers in a range of settings, including for the world famous Arvin, and at the University of Leeds and Newcastle University. She's currently working on a novel aimed at grown-ups, which we might hear a bit about later on, and which she says is new and unfamiliar territory for her. But of course, today we are also promoting her latest book, Dragon Daughter, which you can see in many screenshots behind people. So welcome, Liz. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We've mentioned David Fickling Books, and we're delighted to have Rosie Fickling with us, another panelist. So she is the commissioning editor at David Fickling, the independent publisher she helped launch with David in 2013. Before this, she trained as a patisserie chef at Westminster Kingsway College, alongside working in some top London restaurants, including the Ivy. She also apprenticed with one of the best chocolatiers in the country, William Curley. However, it wasn't long before stories were calling her home, and the opportunity to be part of newly independent David Fickling Books was not something to be missed. She's had the honour of working with some great authors and illustrators over the years, including Philip Pullman, Lissa Evans, Lisa Williamson, and Chris Warmel, and looks forward to discovering and introducing the world to the next great storytellers. So very warm welcome to you, Rosie. Thank you for being part of this afternoon's event. And finally, and by no means leastly, we have the chair for the panel this afternoon, which is Tamsin Rosewell, another multi-talented person. So Tamsin is an artist, she's a historian, a broadcaster, and a bookseller. She worked in Parliament as a researcher and for the British government and Whitehall. She moved to the city to work in the regulated financial services industry on analysis and corporate communications. And after a few years in Brussels, she returned to England to join the team at English Heritage, then part of DCMS. While retaining her interest in economics and public policy, Tamsin now works for 55-year-old independent bookshop Kenilworth Books, where she has been a bookseller for nearly 15 years. Tamsin Rosewell also lectures freelance on the history of ghost lore, the history of perfume, the history of chocolate. Like Rosie, she also trained as a chocolatier, and on Elizabethan horticulture. She paints and exhibits her work, and if any of you have ever been on Kenilworth's website or on Twitter, you'll see the amazing artistic window creations that Tamsin does, as well as her amazing baked goods, which are famous within the industry. So she's done designs for album covers and posters and music videos, as well as published as an illustrator. So thank you so much, Tamsin, for being here this afternoon as well. I can't wait to hear what the three of you are going to talk about. I think just from those bios, we could just talk about chocolate for an hour, but I know the focus this afternoon is on the publishing industry, and I know that's what a lot of people that have come this afternoon want to hear about. So without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Tamsin, and thank you all very much for doing this afternoon for us.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, there can't be many panels from the book industry which have got two trained classiers. You just happen to turn up at that particular moment. Welcome everybody who's joined us. It's really nice to see so many people here. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we start. There is a chat which you can see. If you look at the bottom of your screen, just move the mouse, there's a chat. Please do chat away. We will get to see the chat afterwards. Obviously, while we're talking, it's difficult for us to really look at that in detail, but please do have conversations. Tell us what you're reading, tell us what you're thinking, and we will get to see that. If you have specific questions for the panel, could you please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom, because that's what I'm going to be looking at when we get to the Q&A session. We will leave a lot of time for Q&As. We've got 272 people who signed up today, so if they all ask questions, I'm not quite sure how we're going to get them. I'll have to have a quick fire question round or something, I don't know, but we will get through as many as we can. I'm very aware that a lot of students, aspiring writers, aspiring publishers, aspiring booksellers have joined us today. I'm actually going to kick off with a question to both Rosie and to Liz, and to myself indeed, which is that if you could give future editors, writers or booksellers one bit of advice to prepare for the job you do now, what would that bit of advice be? Rosie, do you want to start?
All right. Amazing question. I could think of so many things. I think the most important thing as an editor, and I think as a writer as well, is being able to survive and thrive on failure and criticism. It's not the easiest job. You have to put up with things going wrong. You have to deal with a lot of people. You have to as an editor, I have to give criticism in a really positive way. And I think as a writer, it's really important to me that the writer I'm talking to knows that I'm trying to help them and I'm not trying to criticize and I'm not trying to say anything negative, really. So that's that wonderful relationship you build with a writer, which I had with Liz, which was one of the best things about us working together, was that I always felt she trusted me. I always felt that she knew that I was trying my best to help her write the best book. And if it came out negatively, we'd find a way around the conversation to make it constructive. So yeah, I think being able to
Rosie, do you find that a lot of writers find that very difficult, or by the time they've got to the stage when they've got their first draft, do you think that actually they understand that the editing process is vital?
I think it really varies, actually. Some are really open to the editorial process, are really open to that feedback. I mean, I think writing a book is a hugely emotional thing. You give up your time. Often you might have another job. It's not a big money-making thing until you're really successful. So you might be working in your evenings, giving up a night out with friends, giving up dinner with your family to write this thing that you're really passionate about. So I think getting a criticism on that could be really, I get that. I mean, I'm the same. Once I've been working on a book for a long time, I'm involved in it. I'm emotionally care about it. I work in my evenings. I read at my weekends. It's a job where we do it because we're passionate and because we care about it. So I think yeah, it really varies. I think some aren't so good at taking criticism, and you find a way to help them in a different way and find a way to inspire them. But that's kind of what my job is, to not criticize, to speak in a way that's positive, inspirational, and motivating. So yeah, I think it really varies person to person. But I mean, that's the job. That's the industry. Everybody's different. Every book is different. Every way you talk to an author is a little bit different because you're dealing with a different human being. So yeah, it's a very varied job.
Let's tailor it. Liz, what's your response to that question about future writers, or indeed booksellers? I think if you've got comments to booksellers, that would be quite interesting as well.
Yeah, so my advice in the very broadest sense would be to find your tribe. For me, that meant joining some organisations, and there's some brilliant writer development organisations out there, like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, Write Mentor, and a lot of them have put their offerings online in this last year or so, even more than ever. It can also mean forming a critique group, because writing can be a lonely experience. And if you've got your friends to talk to and to share early drafts with, you know, they've got your back. And I've got a great critique group. If some of them are here, hello and thank you. And you know, we give each other cheerleading as well as early editorial feedback. and then also broadening it out a little bit. Your tribe can be your local booksellers, your local librarians, you know, all the amazing people who care about books. I was at a conference the other day and a librarian was saying, look, we're not in it for the money, we're in it because we really, really love books and we care about reading and reading for everybody. So yeah, just, I guess, find the people who can support you on the journey, and that definitely includes, you know, your editor as well when you get to that part.
Yeah, it's really interesting because actually it's advice I give to, you know, when I do talks to, you know, either students or the Society of Authors as well, is that, you know, be bold and be generous in your support of others, because actually I noticed that when I'm trying to support a book as a bookseller, you know, when I've maybe done a window display or done an event for it, or was supporting, whether it's a new book from a new writer or whether it's the 20th book from a writer, is that actually if that writer has got around them a whole lot of people that they have supported on the journey, then you get it back. You get that support back, and that often is what echoes your book more broadly, what shares the cover image of it, and actually then it goes out. Other booksellers see the cover image. If I'm sharing the cover, you know, image of a book, it doesn't make any difference to me if, you know, Waterstones and Harrogate are think, oh great, we'll have that as well. It's not competition to me, it just means that book gets more and more exposure, which I think is great. I think my advice to, I think probably particularly future publishers and other booksellers, is that if you're in that stage where you're waiting for your first job, if you're getting frustrated that you've had so many interviews and you've not got your first job, I would say get some retail experience, because it's very frustrating for booksellers actually how few people in even the largest publishing companies have any concept of what actually goes on in a bookshop. So get retail experience, whether you're working in, you know, any kind of chain store, whatever it is on the high street. You'll begin to understand things like trade discounts, like how stock works, how returns work, all of that aspect, which is so important within the book industry. And it's then important to publishers that we don't overorder and then just send all the books back. So my advice to, you know, any prospective booksellers and publishers is get some retail experience while you're in this phase, because I think you will find that really, really valuable. Moving on, one of the things that Liz, Rosie and I were talking about when we were planning this session is that we felt that all of us were in quite glamorized jobs, that, you know, there's this sort of Hollywood idea of what a bookseller you know, does and is, and that people really do assume that we sit there all day reading and it must be just such a lovely job. And I do read books, but that happens in my own time. We certainly don't do it in the bookshop. I spend a lot of time reading publishers' emails. I spend a lot of time reading those. But, you know, actually, I was wondering for the others, how different is your job from that kind of glamorized Hollywood version of it? Rosie, do you want to start on that?
Yeah. Very different, probably. I'd say I do do a lot of reading, but it's often rereading. So I'll read the same thing 30 times. I mean, when I take on a book, one of my little checks with it is, can I read this 40 times and still love it? And then I know it's definitely wonderful. It's definitely something I'm going to love working on, and something that a reader will love. You have to say no a lot. So as I was saying earlier, writing a book takes time, it's passion, it's everything. So I receive so many to read, I have to say no to them, I have to like break hearts all the time. It's horrible. It's like, I can tell that, so like they can be an amazing writer, but the concept's just not quite right for the moment, because you have these zeitgeist. It's really hard to have to say no to lots of really good, promising things as well. So I'd say that's not a fun side of the job. It's emails, it's meetings, so it's not just the fun stuff. But I mean, it's hard because I love my job, so there is a lot of fun stuff as well. It might not be glamorous, it's definitely not glamorous, and I don't think any of us get into books to make money, but it's fun. And I work with lovely people like Liz. I work with lots of really kind, wonderful authors who are great to chat to and meet so many interesting people. So I'm going against it now. It is a glamorous job, it's fun. But I don't think it's not all just reading great books. It's a lot more as well.
It definitely has its moments, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Liz, what about you? Are you the sort of Hollywood writer who's spends the time staring out the window?
I'm so not. It's definitely not 9 to 5, is it? And that's one of the things I love about it. But you also have lots of different kinds of jobs and processes that you're involved with. So like at the moment, I'm getting up really early. We have a new puppy, so I'm getting up at like 5 a.m. I'm writing from, say, 8 till 10 a.m. if I'm lucky. And that's the bit that is most like the Hollywood version of it. And then I'm maybe answering emails. You have to do your own accounts and your own marketing. It's a bit like you split yourself into lots of different people for different aspects of the job. So I try and do little chunks on social media during the day. You might be editing one project. I do some mentoring of other writers, and I really love doing that. So actually, I'm probably doing 10 or 20 different things during the day, and only one of those might be the stereotypical, you know, what people think a writer does. And even then, if you're traveling before the pandemic, often I'd be writing on a train or in a cafe and just squeezing in the creative bit around all the other things that you have to do to earn a living, because most writers don't earn a living from their writing. It's worth saying that up front, isn't it? Either they would have a day job, or they'll be doing lots of events, and children's authors are lucky because they get to go into schools, or they used to, and now they do online events for schools. And I must say that's one of my favorite bits of the job. It's probably about 5% of it is so different from the quiet, introverted, sitting at home making things up, and then you're on a stage talking to 400 school children. And I never thought that I would get to love that part so much, but I found a way of doing it my way, and a way that suited these books. Talking to kids about dragons basically gave me the confidence to stand up and speak to large audiences. And now that's part of the job that I wouldn't give up. Really, really love it.
One of the things that a lot of the writers I know are, they're quite introverted in their nature naturally. I think it's kind of goes with the territory that to create a book or almost anything on that scale, almost by definition, you spend a lot of time on your own. You spend a lot of time in your own company, in your own mind, or with one other person, in your case, you know, with Rosie, working really closely on that text. And then suddenly when it's published, you suddenly have to become this social person who's all over Twitter, and it's expected of you, and you're doing, you know, events, you know, on schools or on Zoom to hundreds of people. And I've always wondered, is that something that you struggle with, or do you flick that switch quite easily and become Liz 1 and Liz 2?
Yeah, I have learned to flick the switch, and what does it for me is when I'm standing there in the room and the children file in, and it's something about focusing on them and thinking, what do they want to hear today? What can I give them? And also just tapping into the very first spark for the story, and trying to remember, what was I trying to do with this book, and how can I get that message across? And it's not something that came naturally to me at all. And in fact, I found it really difficult with Eden Summer speaking to teenagers, partly because it was harder speaking to teenagers, partly because the subject matter was quite difficult. Whereas I love talking about magical animals with school children because it's so accessible, and you can't be wrong, can you, when you're chatting about dragons? And so it's lovely to be able to invite children, you know, to come up with their own magic ideas, and they go for it. When you're working with 9, 10, 11-year-olds, they're so open, so imaginative. It's an absolute joy. So yeah, I guess the answer is that I learned along the way, and yeah, now I love it. If I can do it, anyone can do it, honestly.
Thank you. Can you both tell me a bit more about how you work together? I mean, I know what you created because we can all read it, but you know, how did that work, and what did you actually get back from Rosie, Liz? Do you get pages of notes? Do you get emails? Do you sit down together and go through it? Can you just talk me through how that worked? Let's start with book 1, because I'm wondering as well, is a secondary question, if it's different working on a series from working on a standalone book. So let's start with book 1, that first experience of the two of you working together. What was that like?
Yeah, so I've been working on Dragon Daughter for years and got really, really tangled up with it. And then I'd stopped and written Eden Summer, which was the first book that DFB published. And then with Rosie's patience and help and insight, we untangled the plot. And it took quite a long time, even when we were working together, didn't it, Rosie? And Rosie was brilliant because she helped me focus on really on character. and emotion and the shape of the story. And I didn't know it was going to be a series. So I was quite surprised when the idea for the second one came along. And then Rosie was involved from a really early draft then, which was brilliant. I did a very fast draft using the 100 Days of Writing challenge, which really works for me, helps me press forward and get momentum and get a really rough draft out in 100 days. And then we did lots and lots of editing. And the brilliant thing, I mean, credit to Rosie, she hopped on a train and came to Hebden Bridge, where I live. I don't know if there's many editors that would do that. And that really helped me feel exactly what she said earlier, that we're on the same side, that we're trying to make this book the best it can be together. And when we were sitting side by side in a cafe looking at the proofs, it really felt like that. We're like, oh yeah, there's an issue on this page. What is the best solution? And it's really collaborative, because it is hard, I think, when you're a writer, when the comments land, whether it's in a Zoom call or an email, you know, this is the baby of your imagination. You've been working on it for months and months, and then the feedback comes, and it takes me a couple of days to process it and digest it and remember, oh yeah, we're on the same side, we want the same thing, we want this story to work. And then I start seeing a way forward with Rosie's comments. Oh yeah, she's right, I do need to change this scene, I see what to do now. And I couldn't get there on my own. So that's the wonderful thing about having an editor you trust.
Rosie, what I'm curious about, Rosie, is, you know, there are so many books published today, and the number of submissions that you get and people wanting you to look at their books must be colossal.
Yeah.
How do you pick out the Liz? How do you know can you define what it is you're looking for at that moment in that first draft that is, you know, clearly from what Liz said, is not complete, it's not finished, it's not its best? Can you define that thing,
It's about trusting your gut. You can't define it. It's about seeing the possibility. I don't know, it's like falling in love. You see the possibility in someone, you see the possibility in the book, where it could go, where it could be. I mean, I love stories. I grew up, I mean, obviously Rosie Fickling, David Fickling's my dad, so I've grown up in stories, and his enthusiasm for stories has been kind of embedded in my childhood. And he used to do these things called D&Ds when we were little, where he'd give us characters and he'd tell a story and give us a chance to choose our way through it. And so I was really, from a really young age, working at how a story got built up, seeing how the path, what going down a different path meant to the characters, to your emotion, to the tension, to the drama. So that's always really, really excited and really interested me. And so when I'm reading an early draft, I'm not necessarily, I'm looking for it to be well written. I mean, that was easy with Liz because she writes so visually, so beautifully. So even though that first draft of Dragon Daughter, it wasn't ready, it was still rich, and I was there. I remember that, just like in that orange tree, it's like I don't want to ruin the beginning, but there's a really dramatic scene at the start, and it was just, I was immediately there. I was like, this can be something, this can go somewhere really, really exciting. And I'd love to help it get that way, because I think we're readers, editors are readers. This is my dad's words. Editors are readers, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to make a book or help the writer turn the book into something that the readers out there love. They absolutely fall in love with, get wrapped up in, can't wait to turn the pages. So all I'm doing when I'm editing, reading, is I'm going, oh, I haven't turned that page very quickly. Why is that? Think about that. Why am I not engaged with that character? And then that's how I'll try and talk to Liz, be like, let's get that page. They really want to turn it. So they really want to find out what happens next. And yeah, like I said, it was easy with Liz because she trusted me, because she listened to my feedback, but she was also strong. Liz knows what she wants with her stories. If I said something she didn't agree with, she'd be like, no. And I'm like, good, don't always agree with me, I'm not necessarily right, but we're working together and pushing the boundaries and trying to find that perfect path for the story. Yeah, it was just wonderfully enjoyable. So yeah, so I don't know if I'm looped in a lot of ways, but I think for me, it's just, when you know, I like Eden Summer, when that first came in, I stayed up all night reading it. It's just, I came in the next day, red-eyed, because I haven't slept. I was like, guys, read it. And that's the magic moment of my job, when I pick up a submission and I can't put it down. That's when you know, because it's the same when you read a book you love, isn't it? And that's the one you recommend to your friends. You pick it up, you can't put it down.
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, that's not dissimilar what happens with a bookseller as well. I mean, I remember vividly with Dragon Daughter, Liz's then agent, Ben, phoned me and said, oh, can I just tell you about this book? I think it might be a window display book. And he said, well, there's this island and there's a map at the beginning of the book and there's these dragons, but they've gone away. And then the last 4 dragon eggs are found and it's quite political. It's got Brexit written all over it. And then he said, and that's the cover, and sent me this image. And I was like, yep, that's it. I'm in. I'm totally in at that point. And it's really interesting how quickly and I got engaged in the book for, obviously by the time both of you had really worked on it. And I think it is that same thing. It's that gut instinct. And often I can tell from the conversation I first have with the publisher, or whether it's a publicist or whether it's an editor I'm talking to, who, and their enthusiasm for the book, it's really infectious. You can actually tell a lot. And then we pass that on to customers as well. And actually, I think this is one of the things about being a bookseller, that you have to be a very objective observer to recognize the difference between something that is really great and something that is for you. So just because a book might not be for me doesn't mean it isn't really, really great, because you also hear that infectious, enthusiasm from customers. So we can't read all the books in the shop. There's about 12,000 books in the shop. But, if customers come and say, oh, I read this book and it was absolutely fantastic, I really love it, you can recommend that book, you have that confidence in that book as well. So I think that enthusiasm, that word of mouth, will always take a book much further than any publicity budget.
Definitely, I've seen that in action when I've been, and this is another reason to make friends with booksellers and to do signings, which something I didn't have the confidence to even ask if I could do that with my first book, but then started doing it for the second and third, and just to be in the bookshop for hours of watching the booksellers do their work and to appreciate what a massive impact the booksellers have, chatting to their customers, knowing everybody's different taste and going, oh yeah, you're going to love this one, or yeah, you're going to really love this one, especially at the busy times like leading up to Christmas or something. It can have such a massive impact on book sales and exposure, and everybody dreams of that word of mouth kind of recommendation, but it's booksellers that do it with the hand selling, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think well, that's what gives a book longevity. And we've noticed as well in all our time that prizes are really nice. Book prizes are really nice. I mean, even up to things like, the Booker Prize and the Costa Award, they're great. They will sell a book for about 2.5 weeks on average, and then it often plummets. And it's not unusual at all to find a book winning major awards and then being more or less unavailable within 18 months. That's not unusual at all. So it's not, I promise you, it's not awards that sell books, it's the enthusiasm and it's word of mouth in all its forms that sells a book. It really is. And it's, that's got to come down to quality. I just want to move on to talk about some other aspects of the industry. And we've mentioned in our conversation quite a lot about, that none of us do this for the money, we all do it for other reasons. I would love to see that change, I have to be honest, because I think I see comments from people lamenting profit from publishing houses and assuming that some of our high street bookshop chains are absolutely enormous companies, and actually that's really not the case at all. They're not enormous, and I just think that if you don't on some level have a commercial view on a book and want to sell it, then actually you can't then invest in other titles, you can't then pay authors properly if you haven't got that profit. And I think when people use the word profit, what's in their minds is these kind of multi-billion pound things that end up offshore, and actually all we mean is that a book is a commercial success, and you need that, I think, to really actually have an effective industry. I don't think we can just dismiss this whole idea of profit and just sit there and say, well, we just do it for love. Well, I'm just wondering what your reaction to that is.
I completely agree. I think the money is, people get funny about talking about money, but we're selling books, like there's an exchange of money. They're giving a reader a good experience, they're giving money for it, because that's what you do. When you value something, you pay for it, and the only way we can keep making more books is if we're making enough money. So it's hugely important to talk about, and I totally agree. I hate that you know, I hate that authors would say, I can't make a living off writing. You should be able to make a living off writing. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of passion. It's something that should be really, really valued. And it's, yeah, I don't have a solution, but I totally agree. The money is important. And that's my goal when I take on a book, because I'm not taking it on thinking, oh, this isn't going to sell many copies. I'm taking it on because like readers are going to love this, and it's going to sell loads, and it's going to make that author that I love working with loads of money, which is what you really want. That's the goal. And it's we do it for the passion, but you know, the money is important. Otherwise we can't keep making them. So yeah, I agree, it's an important thing.
And related to that, yeah, I think if we don't pay anybody properly, whether that's editors, authors, booksellers, then that limits the kinds of people who can get involved in the publishing industry, and it needs to open up. Okay, we need to value our work and our professionalism if we are going to attract people from all over the country, from all sectors, from all backgrounds. If only independently wealthy people can work in publishing, that's a real problem. And you know, I did work in publishing briefly in my 20s, and now I wonder, coming from the north, would I be able to do that if I had my time over again? And I don't know if I would have been able to, because I did a 2-week unpaid work experience before I got my first job. And, you know, I'm not from a publishing background. Growing up, I didn't know anybody in publishing or any authors. And there's some great schemes right now, really trying to redress the balance and open things up. But we need to really push that. Everybody needs to be working really hard on that front to make sure everybody can access this industry.
I think actually the fact that we're very, very prissy as an industry about talking about the finances really doesn't help. And I think that's a very English upper class thing, I'm afraid. I think it's a very kind of, you know, Oxbridge, you know, white upper middle class attitude is not to talk about money. Which, in fact, I'm afraid I laughed out loud at him. There was one managing director of a large publishing company who I asked him at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, about a print run of a particular book I was working on, because I realized that actually we may be in a situation when we had to delay a big event, and I wanted to know if I had enough hardbacks to continue to work in hardback. And he actually said to me, we don't discuss print runs, it's ungentlemanly, which made me laugh out loud. I thought, really? And to me, as a bookseller, you know, and again, I think this is where, you know, I would advise anyone, you know, who's looking to go into publishing, really to get some business experience, some retail experience or something, because to me, that was a business discussion. That's nothing to do with, you know, me prying into the affairs of, you know, what, you know, that's private. It's not a private thing, it's a business. We have a situation, how are we going to deal with it? What's the best way to deal with it? And I could not engage with that publishing company on that aspect because they would not discuss the finances with me. You know, so they wouldn't discuss even the print run with me. You know, we often negotiate, when I'm talking to publishing companies, we'll often negotiate, you know, trade discounts if it's a, you know, a massive event we're doing. But again, it's a really taboo subject. We don't discuss it. And yet actually, if we're going to open up the book industry and get more voices in, you know, that we need to be, you know, less constrained in that and actually discuss how that finance is going to work. But no, I think that's a really interesting area. I'd be curious to know what other people, you know, think on that in the chat. Is that yes, I can see Vanessa's Harbour's comment, what century was he working in? I did wonder that myself. He was only a young guy, he was only in his sort of mid-late 30s. I was completely I was actually laughing. It would be very funny if it wasn't so horrific. Let's put it that way. I certainly was wondering about the you know, the financial aspect of it. But for both of you, are there other aspects of the book industry that you'd really like to see change or develop over the next, say, let's say 5 years or so? Rosie, do you want to?
You go, Rosie.
Well, diversity is a hot topic, so more writers from minority backgrounds, more characters from minority backgrounds. That's a huge thing that needs dealing with. I think there's also it's often that girls read more and boys read less, and that maybe that needs work on. Like, yeah, I don't know. I would like to just see lots and lots of good stories out there, and maybe less celeb books and more more debuts, more supporting people who haven't got the contacts, haven't got the way in as easily. So if we can access people who don't have that, that would be great.
Liz, what's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I feel like we've got a great moment of opportunity here, because publishing has had to innovate in the pandemic really fast, and there's just no excuse anymore for things to be London centric. And I'm sorry, because I will bang on about this all the time. For people on low incomes or with caring responsibilities or disabled people, it's really hard to get on a train and get to London for an event. And I think somebody's just referred to this in the chat as well. So let's have a hybrid model going forward. Let's keep some of the best innovation from the last 12 or 18 months. Yeah, it'd be amazing to attend events again in person, but let's keep an online option for people who can't do that. I think it was about 2 years ago, I went to the Festival of Women's Writing at the Bronte Parsonage and contributed to an event that was curated by Kit Dewall. And that was so amazing to be able to travel to an event, contribute to it, and be back in time for my caring responsibilities on the same day. That was something really rare and really precious for me. So yeah, I would like to see more of that going on. And yeah, in a nutshell, that, please.
I think for me, it's about, you know, that there are a lot, as we've referred to in the conversation, there are a lot of projects, of schemes, of real desire to open up the industry to all sorts of people. But I think something deeper has got to change, because I think, as one publishing company recently did, I don't even need to name them, I suspect, you know, it emerged that while they're claiming, you know, high diversity, they're not actually giving those members of staff any dignity in their jobs, in forcing them to work on things that for them are extremely troublesome. And I think, you know, that's not diversity in my mind. That is actually really misunderstood what diversity is about. That's, you know, you don't become diverse just by saying we're diverse and having your photograph smiling away in the bookseller. You actually really have to change at quite a fundamental level, I think. Rosie, one of the things that I'm really interested in as a bookseller is the difference in my relationships between small independent publishing houses like DFB and the really big publishing houses. On some level, it's not that different, in that I've got to know lots of people. We've built lots of really good relationships and friendships throughout that time and through doing all that work. But actually, I feel that I mean, there are so many books published today. Penguin alone is publishing about 500 a month, and that's just one publishing company. So, you know, if you imagine, then there are 5 big publishing companies and about 650 smaller ones. That's an awful lot of books. And I actually worked out with a friend from Waterstones that even if all of us in the whole country, every bookshop was the size of Waterstones Piccadilly, that isn't a business approach that the shops could support. So that leaves me wondering whether you actually, with a small independent publishing company, you get that edit. I don't have to look through 500 books. You know, I know what sort of books DFB might be looking at. I know that whatever is going to come out of that small publishing house is going to be interesting, is going to be a bit different, is going to be quirky. And that helps me as a bookseller. I'm just wondering, from your point of view, Rosie, what do you have a feeling for what the advantages are as an editor working in a small publishing house as opposed to a large one?
For me, we're a small team, it's a consistent team, so it's not moving around a lot. So I mean, for example, me and Anthony are both commissioning editors, and we've worked alongside each other for 8 years now as partners, teammates. So that consistency is really amazing. Also as a small team, if an author rings up, all of us will know about their book. They don't have to find the department or anything like that. So that kind of intimate and nature of the team and the consistency in the team is really lovely about it. Yeah, you don't. I think there are benefits to the big companies as well. They can do more. They can. They have more money. They can do loads and loads of different things. So I think there's place for the big companies and place for the little companies. And as long as we're all trying to get out good books, there's going to be space for the good books that get published. That's just the way it will be. So yeah, for me, working in a small, it's my family business, so it's really precious to me. And I work with my dad and my brothers. so I like it from that point of view, that I'm passionate about the success of the company. So you're talking about the financials of the company are really important to me. It's not just a job, it's important in all those levels. And when we first launched the company, I was doing a lot of the finances, so I got a really good insight into how that works, and how every little thing matters. So I think also in a small company, you get to do lots of different things. So Liz was saying this, she's doing one thing at this time of day, another thing at another time of day. I think in a small company, I'm much more involved with a really amazing experienced rights director, really amazing experience, sales and marketing director that I would never probably get day-to-day contact with until way later in my career if I was in a larger place. So that kind of experience and that kind of great relationship with those different departments is incredible, because I get real insight into what's important about selling a book abroad, what a book needs to sell abroad really well, and also what their sales team really need from me and what they need from the book, and how I should commission a book that will help them as well. So yeah, I've got a really great team, so I feel very lucky in that sense.
Rosie, before I move on a little bit, I just wanted to ask you, we've got a couple of questions in about process, and what so you've mentioned others who are involved in the team at DFB alongside your own work. So what is the process? What actually happens? So you and Liz have finished the book, and then what happens? At what point does the designer come in? Does Liz get any say on the cover design? Do you send it away to print? How does all that work? What happens when that book is actually finished in terms of its content?
That's one of my favorite bits, is once you get to the setting and the design, and I think it's something that's often really overlooked. So when the book is finished, it goes to a copy editor. So that's to get a fresh eye on it, basically, because I've read it so many times, and they'll get make sure there's no inconsistency, any kind of grammatical things, stuff I've missed, basically, which is really helpful to get that fresh eye for the detail. And then we send it to the typesetter. So that is when it gets set to look like it can go on a page. And that's a really fun point. And something I think people don't think about is the font. How many lines on the page, how much space between the lines, how much space between the letters, how much space around the text. Are you going to put an illustration at the chapter header? And I think it's all these little things that you don't want the reader to notice, but you want them to just feel comfortable when they're reading. And if things are wrong, the reader notices and they don't know what is wrong. So for example, if you had a really modern futuristic book and you put a really old-fashioned type of setting, it would feel a bit weird, and vice versa. You had something set in Victorian times and it had a serif font and it was very futuristic looking, it would feel weird to read. So those little tiny things are so important, I think, in making the book feel like a safe place to get caught up and let your imagination just free, because you're not thinking about anything else. So yeah, so we'll get typeset, and then we'll get page proofs, which is what me and Liz would go through together. So we'll proof it, check it, make sure there's no mistakes on the page, make sure we're happy with how the page looks. If there's illustration, the illustrator will go at it at that point. So I've got some books we do have got masses of, I'm going to just tick the pages with no illustration now. So masses of illustration throughout, and that's a bigger process, because you're going back and forth and moving the text around and fitting it around and making sure the illustration works with that bit. And that probably goes for about 3 rounds. You get first proof, second proof, third proof, to get everything as perfect as we can. And when we get to the cover, we'd do a cover brief, so we'd make sure sales, rights, PR, everyone have had their input, and then I would talk to Liz. So that's one of the things that's really important about DFB. We really want the author to love how their book looks. It's not our book, it's Liz's book. So it's really vital that Liz loves the direction that we think is good. So I'll obviously go, oh, we think this would be best for the market, and this is why we've chosen this. Do you agree? What do you think? And all we can do is give our best advice and hope that we can find a beautiful cover together. So then it's beautiful design work by Alison Gadsby on this particular one, and Angelo Rinaldi did the artwork, and he's incredibly talented, as you can tell.
Absolutely stunning. They're really lovely. Before we move on to Q&As, I would really like to ask Liz to do a reading from her book, just to tell you why we chose this particular part. I was doing a talk to some MA students in creative writing last year sometime, and one of the questions I was asked was, do you think hope is important in children's books? And it really troubled me, because I don't know, there's something just about the question that just didn't feel right. And I thought about it for a very long time, and I did think actually that is the wrong question. I think it's not. It'd be very, very strange because there was no hope in it at all, and no bookseller would particularly want to sell it. What I think it is it's the sense of injustice, particularly in children's books, that children feel very, very strongly. And I think that's something Liz has done amazingly well in this book, is that absolutely crushing sense that adults have got it wrong and not listening, are wrapped up in their own affairs. And the section that Liz is going to read, I think, really brought that, to the fore for me. Do you want to short reading, Liz, and then we'll go to Q&A?
Yeah, thank you, Tamsin. So I'll just read a little bit from the beginning. It's Joe, the main character. It's his 12th birthday, and he's gone along to a hatching ceremony, really hoping that one of the dragons is going to choose him. And at this point, things are not going Joe's way. So that's all you need to know. And just like that, it was all over. Joe's dreams were over. 5 children nursed 5 baby dragons. Joe sat there, his hands empty, feeling his heart crack. No dragon wanted him. It wasn't fair. What about him? He would have done anything, given everything. He needed a dragon so badly it hurt. He'd never wanted anything else. He couldn't do anything else or be anything else. He was born to be a dragon rider. So why did none of the dragons want him? His future was a slammed door, leaving him bewildered. Noah sniggered in the silence and whispered, "Happy birthday, Joe," just loud enough for him to hear. From that spark, Joe's fury and disappointment swelled, then exploded. It burned like wildfire, out of control. He felt rage, fiery and vengeful, boiling up like lava and poisoning all his thoughts. "I'm going." The words were out before Joe knew it. You must sit down, Joe, right now," Isaac said tightly. He started blundering away, blinded by tears of anger. "No," a little voice squeaked by his feet. It was Flavia, the Sartolin girl, huddling away from him, clutching the cream-coloured dragon to her chest. For one awful moment, he imagined stamping on the girl and her dragon. He wanted to make someone hurt the way he was hurting, lost in the white heat of his rage. The little girl whimpered in fright, and the tiny dragon tumbled from her arms right into Joe's path. He snarled in response. Standing over the baby dragon, he drew back his right leg. He heard a deep growl behind him and felt the air grow warm as Ravenna kindled flame in her chest. No, how did she know? He hadn't done it. He hadn't done anything. The heat built up, but Joe couldn't move. "No," a new voice shrieked. "Stop her kindling, Lannis. Do it now. Stop her." From the corner of his eye, he saw his cousin Miller rushing forwards, putting herself between him and a potential blast of flame from this protective mother dragon. "Hold, Ravenna," Lannis cried to her dragon. "Stop it." But it was too late. The black dragon had already kindled and her chest was blushing with flame. She opened her mouth and the fire burst out. And I'll stop there, but I hope that makes you want to find out what happens next and how Joe gets himself out of that pickle.
Thank you very much, Liz. Now, as Jessica's told you in the chat thing, have a look at the questions. If there are questions that you also want to ask, just click like on it, because that will move it higher up the box. Right at the top, we have a question from Laura, liked by lots of people, saying, do the panelists have any recommendations for new authors on how to build a social media presence? What platforms and strategies have worked for Liz?
So I would recommend joining in chats. So a lot of organisations will have a chat about a particular subject, or even things like if you're writing YA or middle grade, look for those hashtags. And if anybody knows some great ones, if they could put them in the chat now, that would be great. And just responding when other people share their covers, or sharing books that you've loved. If you go into a bookshop, you know, maybe chat to the bookseller and then do a little picture of your trip and what you bought that day. All those kind of things. I guess it's just making those connections and joining the conversation in a way that feels really generous. Yeah,
I totally second that, Liz. And actually what I would say to all of you in that position when you're maybe just starting out on social media is don't worry about the number of followers so much. Really look, as Liz has said, for, you know, your tribe, your network, for linking into things like Scooby and the Society of Authors. I'll tell you a little story. I was doing a cover reveal in the middle of lockdown with a large publishing company that had about 60,000 followers. The publisher was absolutely rubbish on social media, so the author and I decided to set the book up itself with its own Twitter account the day before the cover reveal, and at the moment of the cover reveal we had 30 followers, and we got more traction and more, we spread the image of that cover further with 30 followers than the large publishing company managed with 60,000. So there you go, you really don't need have lots and lots of followers to really make it work for you. Joanna has asked Liz, so you didn't plan the whole series from the beginning, you started with what you felt at that moment was a standalone novel with Dragon Daughter?
Yeah, it was a standalone. I didn't know if it was going to be a series, and it wasn't until I'd finished it, I think it was actually published, I was watching a documentary about the tunnels underneath the Italian city of Naples and just went, oh, what if there were tunnels underneath our cozy? And suddenly I had a story and a character, and I really liked other authors who've kind of jumped in time in a series. I think Garth Nix does that really, really well, and a couple of other fantasy authors that I love. And so in each of the 3 books, it jumps on 10 years. So you get to see the main characters grow up. And I had a lot of fun with that as well.
Rosie, is that something that happens often, that you start with one book and then it becomes a series, or do authors turn up with a whole series in their mind more often?
I've often authors have got a whole series in mind. I'd say that's more regular. They might have some people you've worked with got 10 books in their head, because that's the thing about creating a book. I think it's, you create a whole world and you get immersed in it. You have to build so many things to make that one book work, and you can't put everything in one book, so that can spill out into other books, I think. And I think that was the thing that probably happened with Dragon Daughter. When we first read it, one of the things we were working on, one of the things Liz worked on so well, was world building, like creating every part of our cozy. It was such a rich cultural world and so beautiful, and so many different varied characters. And because when you're building a whole new world, there's a million places you can't go in that one book. So it almost felt natural that you had to have another one once you'd put so much effort into creating it. So I think it really, really varies. But I think if you've put in a fantasy world, especially, I think often another book comes after you've put so much energy into that first book.
Just moving down the questions, I've got a question from Becca, who's starting her Masters in Publishing in September and is hoping to start her own publishing house. Any advice? My advice is go for it. Just believe in yourself and go for it, Becca, really do. Rosie, any thoughts?
Exactly the same advice. Like if you're passionate, if you're willing to put in the hours, and if you love it, you'll do great, because it's like I said earlier, there's always room for great books. So if you hold on to that passion, it's hard work. So that's what I supported David doing 8-9 years ago now, it was hard work, but it's definitely worth it. It's definitely a really, really fulfilling thing to do. So
thank you very much. I've got a question. Hang on a sec. Olivia's asked, how do we as publishers, so I assume Olivia, you're in a publishing house as well, start to initiate changes and get people to have those conversations regarding diversity and inclusion, in your opinions? I think it's a really interesting question. I think my first thing I would say is that I notice a lot from people that, maybe I've been writing references for, that a lot of publishing companies have still got comments like, we're looking for someone who's a good fit in our team. And have you always wanted to work with books? Now, both of those questions, firstly, if you want to change, you need someone who is not a good fit with your team and who is going to add something and not bring more of the same. So you need to get rid of that phrase completely and actually ask yourself why that phrase is in there in the first place. And secondly, I think if your assumption is that your best candidate is going to have been brought up in a book reading family, then actually you're not going to get diversity. You're going to immediately exclude an awful lot of people who really may really contribute to your publishing house. I don't know if Liz or Rosie, have you got anything to add to that? Those are my immediate thoughts, Olivia.
I mean, I totally agree. My background is not, I mean, yes, I have obviously the family connection, but my career path was very unusual, and I think that's been massively valuable to my skills as an editor. So I didn't do English A level. I don't have a degree, which is, like, you're not going to get into the publishing industry very easily with those things. And I think actually having gone down a different path, having worked, like you suggested earlier, Tamsin, I worked in an office as an office manager, and it was amazing. Organization, fast work, supporting people. These are all skills you need in a publishing house as well. And it's one of the reasons David asked me to come and help him set up DFB was my office experience, not my book club. And chefing, hard work, really hard work, long hours, passion, people, working with people, supporting your team. Like, I do think it is looking for, not, like you said, not looking just for the book lover. I mean, yes, you want them to love books, but it's looking for people who've got really varied, interesting backgrounds as well. And I think that's a good place to start.
I do also hear from people who are applying for jobs in large publishing companies that a lot of them have still got in place what they call their referral scheme. So if you already know someone in that company, it opens doors for you. And I think that has to go. I cannot see, I don't think you could justify that in this day and age. I think that completely goes against everything that diversity is about. So I'd really like to see publishing companies removing those. I'm actually going to leap to Naomi's question, because we did actually talk about this when we flagged up the thing, and we haven't actually answered the question, which is, how does a bookseller choose one dragon story over another? Very interested to hear the answer to this one. It is really interesting because there are so many books published today, and one of the problem for me as a bookseller is that what the large publishing houses are doing is, rather than producing one or two great magical fantasy stories for middle grade each season and then really getting behind them, really supporting those books, they're producing 30 or 40 and they're firing them out into the market and they're seeing what sticks. Somehow I've got a role in that, whether I like it or not, is that I have to pick out the one that I like, that I think is going to work for me. And often it's about how engaged I am with that author, whether the author engages back with me. We have this extraordinary thing called social media, and it can really support a book and a publisher and an author, but they've got to be present on social media for that to work. So often it does come down to, if I'm choosing between two great books on dragons, often, yes, it will come down to the one who I think can use my support best. I know that sounds very commercial, but that is the reality of it, is that if Liz can use the images from a window display, can join me on panels and really do this and put her all into it, then I'm going to choose her work over another book. So I hope that answers the question. I think we've really run out of time. I'm really sorry, everyone. Can I suggest that if you want to continue the conversation, I'm aware there's so many questions we haven't answered and some amazing comments in the chat. If you want to continue talking to each other and talking to us over Twitter and talking about the session, could you use the hashtag Taming Dragons UCL, and then we stand a chance of actually finding the conversation. If you'd like to hear more about the Back to the Future series, before I hand back to Sam briefly, look up the hashtag Back to the Future within UCL's, particularly Arts and Humanities and Social and Historical Sciences. Yeah, I'm really sorry, we could have gone on for another hour. I think everybody couldn't. We really could quite happily. Sam, can I hand back over to you to say who our panelists, Liz and Liz?
Yes, thank you, Tamsin. And yes, that was the fastest hour, I think, that I've ever experienced. Thank you so much, Liz, for sharing your passion for your work and for doing that beautiful reading for the book, which I'm hoping has now driven everybody to the link that you should have got with your event ticket. So you can all go and buy one online, or please go out and support your local bookshops wherever you can. You've all got a reason now to go and buy at least one book that Liz has introduced us to today. So thank you so much, Liz, for your insights. And Rosie, thank you too for sharing so honestly your experiences as a publisher. That was great, and I know a lot of people will have benefited from that. And Tamsin, thank you so much for giving the bookseller's view, which, as you know, is something that I believe passionately that often gets missed out of talks on publishing.
Can I add a thank you to my fellow booksellers at Blackwell's who stepped in? I think it's their link that you've shared. They are independent booksellers. They are local to David Fickling Bookstore, based in Oxford. And not one of us is from in London. Not one of us is talking to you from London. And actually, I love all the comments about how much more accessible the book industry is in lockdown. I've got mobility problems myself, and I've been able to join in so much more, and I love it. So yeah, follow that link to Blackwell's and support my fellow booksellers, my fellow indie booksellers. So thank you.
Thank you, Tamsin. Thank you to everyone, and thank you so much to everyone that's come along this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed it, and as Tamsin says, we'll all be over on Twitter following that hashtag, so if you want to continue the conversation, head on over there. But meanwhile, thank you so much, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.